Hi guys, this is Allison from Allykatkreations. How are you? Share and subscribe to my channel if you have yet to do so. And if you get anything from my work, a connected an epiphany, a mind explosion, new book to read, a new author to explore, please support me. And all those links are at the bottom of this video. And if you would so humble me, check out my website, AllyKatzkreations211, where you could find hearts, desk items. You can put your paper clips and rubber bands in these little gem fellows. I can do the best that I can with customization on colors. I got cool skulls. These have bigger gems inside of them. Pyramids and all kinds of fun other stuff. So if you're interested, go check out my website. The link is on YouTube. And everybody else, hi. Check out my TikTok channel, AllyKat211. The link is also in the description. TikTok, okay, this is the second video that had a warning and I had to take it down. Check out WeNotMe, USS Liberty interview. There's a lot going on and there's a lot of suppression around it because I was talking about, I presented about the monument and automatically disinformation, you're steering a narrative, Wow. Not the first time I've been suppressed and can't get words out. Go check that out on Rumble. I'm just amazed at society right now. Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. Today we're going to cover the faith of Islam. And for all my Muslim friends out there, and I know I have a lot, hi. Just a reminder with the rest of this book or any books that I read, I do not align with some of the things that are said about religion. I'm not here to denounce, demean, or disrespect anybody or your faith. I ask you to explore and expand your consciousness, which is light, which is love, and unifying all of it. So not everything do I read do I honestly agree with. But I like to read anyway because we need to have an awareness of what others are thinking and saying. So as we begin, I do apologize. I am dyslexic and I have projection issues. Gotta love that, but the faith and wisdom gotta come out. Representative of the attitude of Christendom toward Islam, till recent years at least, is Alexander Ross's postscript to the angelicized, I totally butchered that word too, there we go, version published in 1649 of Sawyer du Rye's French translation of the Quran. The author of the postscript directs the following invective against Muhammad and the Quran. Good reader, the great Arabian impostor now at last, after 1,000 years, is by the way of France arrived in England. In his Alcoran or Glamaphory of errors, sorry, I am defacing wording here, a brat as deformed as the parent and as full of heresies as he scolded head was of scurvy, hath learned to speak English. If you will take a brief view of the Alcoran, you shall find a hodgepodge of made up of these four ingredients: one of contradictions, two of blasphemy, of ridiculous fables, and four of lies. The accusation of blasphemy is emphasized against Muhammad because he affirmed that God, being unmarried, was incapable of having a son, The fallacy of this argument, however, is apparent from the prophet's own views of nature of God is contained in the second surah of the Quran. To Allah, God, belongeth the east and the west. Therefore, whithersoever ye turn yourselves to pray, there is the face of Allah. For Allah is omnipresent and omniscient. They say, Allah hath begotten children. Allah forbid. To him belongeth whatever is in heaven and on earth. All is possessed by him, the creator of heaven and earth. And when he decreeth a thing, he only saith unto it, be, and it is. In other words, the God of Islam has but to desire the object of that desire at one comes into being, whereas the God of Alexander Ross must proceed to accord with the laws of human generation. Muhammad, prophet of Islam, the desired of all nations, was born in Mecca, AD 570, and there's a question mark there, and died in Medina, AD 632, or in the 11th year after the Hijra. Washington Irving thus describes the signs and wonders accompanying the birth of the prophet. His mother suffered none of the pangs of travail. At the moment his coming into the world, a celestial light illumined the surrounding country, and his newborn child, raising the eyes to heaven, exclaimed, God is great. There is no God but God, and I am his prophet. Heaven and earth, we are assured, were aggregated at his advent. The lake Sawa shrank back to its secret springs, leaving its borders dry, while the Tigris, bursting its bounds, overflow the neighboring lands. The palace of Corso, I'm totally butchering these names, and I do apologize. I'm not here to disrespect. The king of Persia shook on its foundations, and several of its towers were toppled to the earth. In the same eventful night, the sacred fire of Zoroaster, which guarded by the Magi, had burned without interruption for upward of 1,000 years, was suddenly extinguished, and all the idols in the world fell down. While the prophet was still but a toddling babe, the angel Gabriel, with 70 wings, came to him, and cutting open the child, withdrew the heart. This Gabriel cleansed of the black drop of original sin, which is in every human heart, because of the perfidy of Adam, and then returned to the organ to its proper place in the prophet's body. In his youth, Muhammad traveled the Meccan caravans. On one occasion, acted as armor bearer for his uncle, and spent a considerable time among the Bedouins, from whom he learned many of the religious and philosophic traditions of ancient Arabia. While traveling with his uncle, Abu Talib, Muhammad contacted the Nestorian Christians, having encamped on a certain night near one of their monasteries. Here the young prophet to be secured much of his information concerning the origin and doctrines of the Christian faith. With the passing years, Muhammad obtained marked success in business, and when about 26 years old, married one of his employers, a wealthy widow, nearly 50 years his senior. The widow, I'm not pronouncing that name nor butchering it, so I'm going to leave it as you can figure that one out for yourself. By name, was apparently somewhat mercenary. For finding her young business manager most efficient, she resolved to retain him in the capacity for life. She was a woman of exceptional mentality, and her integrity and devotion must be ascribed the early success of the Islamic cause. By his marriage, Muhammad was elevated from a position of comparative poverty to one of great wealth and power. So exemplary was his conduct that he became known throughout Mecca as the faithful and true. Muhammad would have lived and died an honored and respected Meccan had he not unhesitantly sacrificed both his wealth and social position in the service of the God whose voice he heard while meditating in the cavern on Mount Hira in the month of Ramadan. Year after year, Muhammad climbed the rocky and desolate slopes of Mount Hira, since called Jebel Nur, the mountain of light. And here is the loneliness cried out to the God to reveal anew the pure religion of Adam, that spiritual doctrine lost to mankind through the dissensions of religious factions. She solicitous over her husband's aesthetic practices, which were impairing his physical health, sometimes accompanied him to his weary vigil, and with womanly intuition sensed the travail of his soul. At last, one night in his 40th year, as he lay upon the floor of the cavern, enveloped in his cloak, a great light bursted upon him. Overcome with the sense of perfect peace and understanding in the blessedness of the celestial presence, he lost consciousness. When he came to himself again, the angel Gabriel stood before him, exhibiting a silken shawl with mysterious characters traced upon it. From these characters, Muhammad gained the basic doctrines later embodied in the Quran. Then Gabriel spoke in a clear and wonderful voice, declaring Muhammad to be the prophet of the living God. In awe and trembling, Muhammad hastened to his wife, fearing the vision had to be inspired by some evil spirits who served the pagan magicians, so greatly despised by him. His wife assured him that his own virtuous life would be his protection and that he needed fear no evil. Thus reassured, the prophet awaited further visitations from Gabriel. When these did not come, however, such a despair filled his soul that he attempted self-destruction, only to be stopped in the very act of casting himself over a cliff by sudden reappearance of Gabriel, who again assured the prophet that the revelations needed by his people would be given to him as necessity arose. Possibly as a result of his lonely periods of meditation, Muhammad seemingly was subject to ecstatic swoons. On the occasions when the various surahs of the Quran were dictated, he is said to have fallen unconscious and, regardless of the chill of the surrounding air, to have covered with beads of perspiration. Often these attacks came without warning. At other times he would sit wrapped in a blanket to prevent a chill from the copious perspiration, and while apparently unconscious would dictate the various passages which a small circle of trusted friends would either commit to memory or reduce to writing. On one occasion in the later life, when Abu Bakr referred to the gray hairs in his beard, Muhammad, lifting the end of his beard and looking at it, declared it as whiteness to be due to the physical agony attendant upon his periods of inspiration. I'm going to put a pause here. So what Muhammad was actually doing was channeling and connecting with his higher self and source itself. If the writings attributed to Muhammad be considered as merely the hallucinations of an epileptic, or for the reason discounted, his Christian detractors should beware lest with the doctrines of the prophet they also undermine the very teachings which they themselves affirm. For many of the disciples, apostles, and saints of the early church are known to have been subjected to nervous disorders. Muhammad's first convert was his own wife, who was followed by other members of his immediate family, a circumstance which moved Sir William Muir to note. It is strongly corroborative of Muhammad's sincerity that the earliest converts to Islam were not only of upright character, but of his own bosom, friends, and people of his household, who, intimately acquainted with his private life, could not fail otherwise to have detected these discrepancies which ever more or less exist between the professions of the hypocritical deceiver abroad and his actions at home. Among the first to accept the faith of Islam was Abu Bakr, who became Muhammad's close and most faithful friend, in fact, his alter ego. Abu Bakr, a man of brilliant attainments, contributed materially to the success of the Prophet's enterprise, and in accord with the express wish of the Prophet, became the leader of the faithful after Muhammad's death. Aisha, the daughter of Abu Bakr, later became the wife of Muhammad, thus still further cementing the bond of fraternity between the two men. Quietly but industriously, Muhammad propagated his doctrines among a small circle of powerful friends. When the enthusiasm of his followers finally forced his hand and he publicly announced his mission, he was already the leader of a strong and well-organized faction. Fearing Muhammad's growing prestige, the people of Mecca, waiving the time-honored tradition that blood could not be spilled within the holy city, decided to exterminate Islam by assassinating the Prophet. All the different groups combined in the undertaking so that the guilt for the crime might thereby be more evenly distributed. Discovering the danger in time, Muhammad left his friends, Ali, in his bed and fled with Abu Bakr from the city. And after adroitly eluding the Meccans, joined the main body of his followers, and he had preceded him to Yathrib, afterwards called Medina, until and upon this incident called the Hijriya or flight is based the Islamic chronological system. Dating from the Hijra, the power of the Prophet steadily grew until in the 18th year Muhammad entered Mecca after practically a bloodless victory and established it as a spiritual center of his faith. Planting his standard to the north of Mecca, he rode into the city after circling 7 times the sacred Kaaba, ordered the 360 images within its precincts to be hewn down. He then entered the Kaaba, I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, itself, cleansed it and of its idolatrous associations and rededicated the structure to Allah, the monotheistic God of Islam. Muhammad next granted amnesty to all his enemies for their attempts to destroy him. Under his protection, Mecca increased in power and glory, becoming the focal point of a great annual pilgrimage, which even to this day winds across the desert in the months of pilgrimage and numbers over 70,000 in its train. In the 10th year after the Hijra, Muhammad led the valedictory pilgrimage for the last time, rode at the head of the faithful along the way, the sacred way, leading to Mecca and the Black Stone. As the promotion of death was strong upon him, he desired this pilgrimage to be the perfect model for all the thousands that would follow. Conscious that life was waning away within him, writes Washington Irving, Muhammad, during the last sojourn in the sacred city of his faith, sought to engrave his doctrines deeply in the minds and the hearts of the followers. For this purpose, he preached frequently in the Kaaba, from the pulpit, or in the open air from the back of his camel. Listen to my words, would he say, for I know not whether after this year we shall ever meet here again. O my hearers, I am but a man like yourselves. The angel of death may at any time appear, and I must obey his summons. While thus preaching, the very heavens are said to have opened, and the voice of God spoke, saying, This day I have perfected your religion and accomplished in you my grace. When these words were uttered, the multitude fell down in admiration, and even Muhammad's camel knelt. Having completed the valedictory pilgrimage, Muhammad returned to Medina. In the 7th year after the Hijra, an attempt was made at Hebar to poison the Prophet. As Muhammad took the first mouthful of the poisoned food, the evil designed was revealed to him either by the taste of the meat or, as the faithful believed, by divine intercession. He had already swallowed a small portion of the food, however, and for the remainder of his life, he suffered almost constantly from the effects of the poison. In AH 11, when his final illness came upon him, Muhammad insisted that the subtle effects of the poison were the indirect cause of his approaching end. It is related that during his last sickness, he rose one night and visited a burial ground on the outskirts of Medina, evidently believing that he, too, would soon be numbered with the dead. At this time, he told an attendant that the choice had been offered him of continuing his physical life or going to his Lord, and that he made his choice to meet his Maker. Muhammad suffered greatly with his head and side and also from fever, but on June 8th seemed convalescent. He joined his followers in prayer and sitting himself in the courtyard delivered a lecture to the faithful in a clear and powerful voice. Apparently he overtaxed his strength, for it was necessary to assist him in the house of a Shia, which opened into the court of the mosque. Here upon a rough pallet lay on the bare floor the Prophet of Islam, spent his last 2 hours on earth. When she saw that her aged husband was suffering intense pain, a Shia, then but a girl of 20, lifting the gray head of the man she had known from infancy and who must have seemed more like a father than a husband, supported him in her arms until the end. Feeling that death was upon him, Muhammad prayed, "O Lord, I beseech thee, assist me in the agonies of death." Then almost in a whisper, he repeated 3 times, "Gabriel, come close unto me." In The Hero as Prophet, Thomas Carlyle writes thus of the death of Muhammad. His last words were a prayer, broken ejaculations of a heart struggling up in trembling hope towards its maker. Muhammad was buried under the floor of the apartment in which he died. The present condition of the grave is thus described. Above the Hurja is a green dome surmounted by a large gilt crescent springing from a series of globes. Within the building are the tombs of Muhammad, Abu Bakr, and Umar, with a space reserved for the grave of our Lord Jesus Christ, who Muslims say will again visit the earth and die and be buried at Al-Medina. The grave of Fatima, the Prophet's daughter, is supposed to be in a separate part of the building, although some say she was buried in Bach. The Prophet's body is said to be stretched full length on the right side, with the right palm supporting the right cheek, the face fronting Mecca. Close behind him is a place, Abu Bakr, whose face fronts Muhammad's shoulder, and then Umar, who occupies the same position with respect to his predecessor. Amongst Christian historians, there is a popular story to the effect that Mohammedans believe the coffin of their prophet to be suspended in the air, which has no foundation whatever in Muslim literature, and Nibar thinks the story must have arisen from the rude pictures sold to strangers. Concerning the character of Muhammad, there have been the grossest misconceptions. No evidence exists supported the changes of extreme cruelty and lectiousness laid at his door. On the other hand, the more closely the life of Muhammad is scrutinized by dispassionate investigators, the more apparent becomes the finer qualities of his nature. In the words of Carlyle, Muhammad himself, after all that can be said about him, was not a sensual man. We so err widely if we consider this man as a common voluptuary, intent mainly on base enjoyments, nigh on enjoyments of any kind. His household was of frugalist, his common diet barley, bread, and water. Sometimes for months there was not a fire once lighted on his hearth. A poor, hard-working, ill-provided man, careless of what vulgar man toil for. They called him a prophet, you say. Why, he stood there face to face with them. They're not enshrined in any mystery, visibly clouding his own cloak, cobbling his own shoes, fighting, counseling, ordering in the midst of them. They must have seen what kind of man he was. Let him be called what you like. No emperor with his tiaras was obeyed as this man in a cloak of his own clouding. Confused by the apparently hopeless task of reconciling the life of prophet with the absurd statements long accepted as authentic, Washington Irving weighs him in the scales of fairness. His military triumphs awakened no pride nor vain glory. as they would have done, have they been effective for selfish purposes. In the time of his greatest power, he maintained the same simplicity of manners and appearances as in the days of his adversary. It is this perfect abnegation of self, connected with his apparent heartfelt pity, running throughout the various phases of his fortune, which perplex one in forming a just estimate of Muhammad's character. When he hung over the deathbed of his infant son, Ibrahim, resigned to the will of God, was exhibited in his conduct under the keenness of afflictions, and the hope of soon rejoining his child in paradise was his consolation. A Shia, questioned after the death of the Prophet concerning his habits, replied that he mended his own clothes, cobbled his own shoes, and helped her in the household duties. How far removed from Western concepts of Muhammad's sanguinary character is a Shia's simple admission that he loved most of all to sew. He also accepted the invitations of slaves and sat at meals with servants, declaring himself to be a servant. Of all vices, he hated lying the most. Before his death, he freed all his slaves, never permitted his family to use for personal ends any of the alms or tithe money given by his people. He was fond of sweetmeats, used rainwater for drinking purposes. His time he divided into three parts, namely, the first he gave to God, the second to his family, and third to himself. The latter portion, however, he later sacrificed to the service of his people. He dressed chiefly in white, but almost also wore red, yellow, and green. Muhammad entered Mecca wearing a black turban and bearing a black standard. He wore only the plainest of garments, declaring the rich and conspicuous remnant did not become the pious and did not remove his shoes at prayer. He was also particularly concerned with the cleanliness of his teeth, and at the time of his death, when too weak to speak, indicated his desire for a toothpick. When fearful of forgetting something, the Prophet tied a thread to his ring. He once had a very fine gold ring, but noting that his followers had taken it to wear something, wearing similar rings to emulate of him, he removed his own and threw it away, lest his followers form an evil habit. The most frequent and apparently the most damning accusation brought against Muhammad is that of polygamy. Those who sincerely believe that harem to be irreconcilable with spirituality should be consistently moved by the expurgation of the Psalms of David and the Proverbs of Solomon. For the list of inspired writings for the harem of Islam's prophet was insignificant compared with the maintained by Israel's wisest king and the reputed favorite of the Most High. The popular conception that Muhammad taught that women had no soul and could obtain heaven only through marriage is not substantiated by the words and attitude of the Prophet during his lifetime. In a paper entitled The Influence of Islam on Social Conditions, read at the World's Parliament of Religions held in Chicago in 1893, Muhammad Webb states the charge and answers it thus. It has been said that Muhammad in the Quran denied a soul to women and ranked her with the animals. The Quran places her on a perfect and complete equality with man, and the Prophet's teachings often place her in a position superior to the male in some respects. Mr. Webb justifies his stand by quoting from the 35th verse of the 33rd surah of the Quran. Verily, the Muslims of either sex and the true believers of either sex and the devout men and the devout women and the men of verity and the women of verity and the patient men and the patient women and the humble men and the humble women and the alms givers of either sex and the men who fast and the women who fast and the chaste men and the chaste women and those of either sex who remember Allah frequently. For them hath Allah prepared forgiveness and great reward. Here the obtainment of heaven is clearly set forth as a problem whose only solution is that of the individual merit. On the day of his death, Muhammad told Fatima, his beloved daughter, and his aunt, Work ye out that which shall gain acceptance for you with the Lord, for I verily have no power with him to save you in any wise. The prophet did not advise either woman to rely upon the virtues of her husband, nor in any manner did he indicate woman's salvation to be dependent upon the human frailty of her spouse. Everything to the contrary notwithstanding, Muhammad is not responsible for the contradictions and inconsistencies in the Quran, for the volume was not compiled and not assume its present form until over 20 years after his death. In its present state, the Quran is for the majority part a jumble of heresy through which occasionally shines forth an example of true inspiration. From what is known of the man Muhammad, it is responsible to suppose that these nobler and finer portions represent the actual doctrines of the prophet. The remainder are obviously interpolations, some arising from misunderstandings and others direct forgeries, calculated to signify the temporal ambitions of conquering Islam. On the subject, Godfrey Higgins speaks with his usual perspicacity. Here we have the Quran of Muhammad and the first four sincere and zealous patriarchs, and the Quran of the conquering and magnificent Sakrins, puffed up with pride and vanity. The Quran of the eclectic philosopher was not likely to suit the conquerors of Asia. A new one must be grafted on the old to find a justification for the enormities. To the discerning few, it is evident that Muhammad had a knowledge of the secret doctrine, which must needs constitute the core of every great philosophical, religious, or ethical institution. Through one of four possible avenues, Muhammad may have contacted the great ancient mystery teachings through direct contact with the great school in the invisible world. Two, through the Nostrian Christian monks. Three, through the mysterious holy man who appeared and disappeared at frequent intervals during the period in which the surahs of the Quran were revealed. Four, through a decadent school already existing in Arabia, which school, in spite of its lapse into idolatry, still retained the secrets of the ancient wisdom cult. The arcana of Islam may yet be demonstrated to have been directly founded upon the ancient pagan mysteries performed at the Kaaba centuries before the birth of the prophet. In fact, it is generally admitted that many of the ceremonials now embodied in the Islamic mysteries are survivals of pagan Arabia. The feminine principle is repeatedly emphasized in Islamic symbolism. For example, Friday, which is sacred to the planet Venus, is the Muslims' holy day. Green is the color of the prophet, and being symbolic of Venur, is inevitably associated with the world mother. And both the Islamic crescent and skipmar may be interpreted to signify the crescent shape of either the moon or Venus. The famous stone of Kaaba, or Kibar at Mecca, says Jennings, which is so devoutly kissed by the faithful, is a talisman. It is said that the figure of Venus is seen to this day engraved upon it with a crescent. This very Kaaba itself was at first an idolatrous temple where the Arabians worshipped Al-Uzza, god of Issa, that is Venus. Interesting there. The Muslims, right, Sir William Jones, are already a sort of heterodox Christians. They are Christians. If Locke reasons justly, because they firmly believe the Immaculate Conception, divine character, and miracles of the Messiah, but they are heterodox in denying vehemently his character of a son and his equally as God with the Father, of whose unity and attributes they entertain and express the most awful ideas, while they consider our doctrine a perfect blasphemy and insist that our copies of the scriptures have been corrupted both by Jews and Christians. The following lines are declared by the followers of the prophet to have been deleted from the Christian Gospels. And when Jesus, the son of Mary, said, O children of Israel, verily I am the apostle of God, sent unto you, confirming the law which was delivered before me, and bringing good tidings of an apostle who shall come after me, and whose name shall be Amen. In present text containing the prophecy of Jesus concerning a comforter to come after him, it is further claimed that the word comforter shall be translated illustrious, and that it had directed reference to Muhammad. Also, that the tongues of flame that descended upon the apostles on the day of Pentecost in no way could be interpreted as signifying the promised comforter. When asked, however, for definite proof that the original Gospels contain these so-called expurgated references to Muhammad, the Muslims make a counter demand for production of the original doctrines upon which Christianity is founded. Until such writings are discovered, the point under dispute must remain source of controversy. I just want to put my own personal note in here, the Council of Nicaea. To ignore the heritage of culture received from Islam would be an horrible oversight. From the crescent triumph over the cross in southern Europe, it was a harbinger of civilization which had no equal in its day. In Studies in a Mosque, Stanley Lane Poole writes, for nearly 8 centuries under her Mohammedan rulers, Spain set to all Europe a shining example of a civilized and enlightened state. Art, literature, and science prospered as then prospered nowhere else in Europe. Students flocked from France and Germany and England to drink from the fountains of learning, which flowed only in the cities of the Moors. The surgeons and doctors of Andalusia were in the van of science. Women were encouraged to devote themselves to serious study, and lady doctor was not unknown among the people of Cordova. Mathematics, astronomy, and botany, history, philosophy, and jurisprudence were to be mastered in Spain and Spain alone. The library of original sources thus sums up the effects of Islam. The results of Mohammedanism have been greatly underestimated. In the century after Muhammad's death, wrested Asia Minor, Africa, and Spain from Christianity more than half of the civilized world and established a civilization, the highest in the world during the Dark Ages. It brought the Arabian race to their highest development, raised the position of women in the East, though it retained polygamy, was intensively monotheistic, and until the Turks gained control, for the most part, encouraged progress. In the same work, among the great Islamic scientists and philosophers who have made substantial contributions to human knowledge are listed Gerber and Jafar, who in the 9th century laid the foundations for modern chemistry, Ben Musa, who in the 10th century introduced the theory of algebra, Alhaze, who in the 11th century made a profound study of optics and discovered the magnifying power of convex lenses. In the 11th century also, both Avicenna or Ibn Sina, whose medical encyclopedia was the standard of his age, and the great Kabbalist Avisbran or Ibn Gerbal. Looking back upon the science of the Mohammedans, resumes the authority just quoted, it will be seen that they laid the first foundations of chemistry and made important advances in mathematics and optics. Their discoveries never had the influence they should have had upon the course of European civilization, but this was because Europe itself was not enlightened enough to grasp and make use of them. Gerber's observation that oxidized iron weighs heavier than before oxidation had to be made over again. So had some of their work in optics and many of their geographical discoveries, they had rounded Africa long before Vasco da Gama. The composition of gunpowder came into Northern Europe from them. We must never forget the Dark Ages in Christian Europe were the blight ones of the Mohammedans' world. In the field of philosophy, the Arabs started by adopting the Neoplatism they found in Europe and gradually working back to Aristotle. What means the subtle mystery of the phoenix reborn every 600 years, faintly from within the sanctuary of the world mysteries, and whispered the answer. 600 years before Christ, the phoenix of wisdom, Pythagoras, spread its wings and died upon the altar of humanity, consumed by the sacrifice fire. In Nazareth, the bird was again reborn from its own ashes, only to die upon the tree, which had its roots in Adam's skull. In AD 600, appeared Muhammad. Again, the phoenix suffered, this time from the poison of Kebar, and from its charred ashes rose to spread its wings across the face of Mongolia, where the 12th century of Genghis Khan established a rule of wisdom. Circling the mighty desert of Gobi, the phoenix again gave up its form, which now lies buried in a glass sarcophagus under the pyramid, bearing upon its infallible figures of the mysteries. After the lapse of 600 years from the death of Genghis Khan, did Napoleon Bonaparte, who believed himself to be the man of destiny, contact his wanderings, this strange legend of the continual periodic rebirth of wisdom? Did he feel the spreading wings of the phoenix within himself, and did he believe the hope of the world had taken flesh in him? The eagle on his standard may well have been the phoenix. This would explain why he was moved to believe himself predestined to establish the kingdom of Christ on earth, and is perhaps the clue to his little understood friendliness toward the Muslim. And that will end that section, guys. Next time, American Indian symbolism. Once again, I don't feel comfortable with that section. I know it was not my words, it was other people's projections. But under all books, things have to be investigated and looked under with a fine-tooth comb. And like the TikTok I did earlier, a lot of things have been 1984, rewritten, misunderstood, conceived and perceived in different viewpoints that not all of us will align with or agree. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what was said, because I know the faith to be something different from what was spoken. And I honor other people's faiths as much as I am spiritual. Don't take one up. Each to have an experience as source is experiencing itself through all of us. So guys, sending you love, light, compassion, grace, protecting and shielding energy. There's a lot going on right now. I have to clear myself. Sending all of you that energy, love and light. Go within. Be the shoulder for somebody today. Be the lighthouse to seed information and wisdom and knowledge. And I hope to see you guys on the next one. Thank you for your support and continual support of me and my channel. Until the next time, guys. Bye for now.